The misinformation and propaganda that's going to come from the right, they're going to use it to get people to hate homeless people even more. Mm-hmm. And we have basically had our heads in the sand.
We can't even agree on what the definition of ending homelessness means. They want to end the visibility of homelessness.
What HUD is doing now, leaning towards faith-based organizations, most of them are not trying to prevent and solve homelessness. They're trying to win people to Jesus.
If they want to win people to Jesus, win people to Jesus. If they want to solve homelessness, solve homelessness. Do you ever fear that we're going to stay stuck on stupid?
I fear it a lot. I'm concerned, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, all the above.
It's the first time I was willing to admit to myself, we're not going to end homelessness in my lifetime. That was it, man. That was my reason for existing. But now is the time to be critical about what we do to be better, not critical for the sake of being critical.
This episode is sponsored by Pulse for Good. Real change starts with listening. Pulse for Good helps organizations get honest feedback from the people they serve. To learn more, visit pulseforgood.com/invisible people. This is our 7th podcast with Iain De Jong, and each one has been unique and powerful. In the last episode, we're just getting warmed up, trust me. So while this is technically a part 2, it carries a completely different energy. Episode 6 mattered because we took on hard topics most people in the homeless sector avoid. But that's what Homeless Unfiltered podcast is all about. Honest, authentic conversations. In this episode, we look at where homeless services sector stands now. And it's a mixed picture. The pandemic showed us at our best, nimble, creative, housing people fast, but it also left burnout, lost staff, and a system stretched thin. Since then, the housing market has shifted, rents are up, vacancies down, benefits aren't keeping pace, and now the grants pass decision is fueling a national push towards criminalization. Politicians are demanding more shelters instead of real housing because what they want is homelessness out of sight, not solved. Resources are scarce, nonprofits are competing like the Hunger Games, staff are treated as disposable, and HUD is leaning heavily into faith-based providers. And there's wonderful faith-based providers, but Jesus isn't magic. We risk replacing solutions with conversion. This podcast is candid, it's uncomfortable at times, but it's also helpful. Because if we're willing to get real, we can focus on solutions that actually work. Housing, matching people to the right support, and building narratives the public can believe in. Welcome back.
Here we are.
We talked about a lot of things.
Let's look at where this sector has been just in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Right? So we humming along. Things weren't necessarily great, but we are still maintaining decent results towards whatever ending homelessness meant to a community, and we should get into that a little bit. But humming along, pandemic comes along, then we see what I think is some of the best of our sector. Right? Yes, there's lots of horrible things, but some of the best. The ability to be nimble, to put people at the center, to try new things, to innovate.
We rose to the occasion.
We just, from turning motels or convention centers or whatever into safe spaces.
Right.
We rethought unsheltered homelessness.
Pretty miraculous.
Access to portable toilets, it was miraculous. And then we saw the valley that comes out of that, right? Because that's a lot of energy, a lot of inputs, a lot of long hours, and then it's not sustainable. But you have the infrastructure in place, so some of those early champions can go by the wayside. But also we lost some really great career staff in this space who said, this is enough for me. I can't do this anymore. Right. And then we come out of that and the world starts to open up again, and we notice that the society is much more fractured, right? There's pro-vaxxers, anti-vaxxers. There's people who are pro work from home, pro hybrid, pro go back to the office.
The polarization
There's the polarization just blossoms in a way that it's never seen. It's almost like we had time to sit back by ourselves in our bubbles and say, like, who do I really like?
And that's the real crisis, because we don't have conversations anymore.
No. So, like, that goes out the window. And then we start to get our footing back and we realize, this housing market has completely changed. Rental prices have gone through the roof. Vacancy rates have gone down. Oh, by the way, for people who relied upon income assistance and benefits of any sort, Social Security, disability, etc., that's not keeping pace necessarily with the cost of housing. So we see this kind of new tension in a new way coming out of it. And then we have the political background, which is the movements in different state governments to try and move towards criminalization. We have the grants pass decision at the Supreme Court. We have a movement towards a 2-year notice of funding opportunities, which now have been scaled back to a 1 year, a change in the administration in DC, a change in the secretary, a change in approach. I think that someone coming new into the sector right now would have a hard time figuring out its roots, its origins, its history, and its promise.
Yeah.
I think some people who have been at it for a while, they remember the glory days, right? And that's passing. And then we've got other people who are kind of stuck in the legit kind of doom and gloom of the day-to-day reality with everybody being fed up about homelessness. And so, kind of over the last 5 years, we've done with look what we can do. Oh, crap, everything's changed around us. The homeless service sector sucks. Right? I only know of one place, and there may be more. I only know of one community that did any sort of homeless worker appreciation day for their time during the pandemic. First responders, nurses, health professionals, rightfully so, but truck drivers, but not those in the sector.
I used to say, when I worked in homeless services, direct services, I used to say that, and this was every place I worked, not just one place, that they cared about homeless people, rightly so, that's what we're there for, but they didn't give a shit about us as employees. Nothing. There was zero appreciation. I mean, it might have been, hey, great job, how'd it feel getting that person housed, but nothing outside of that.
Well, and in many of the communities I work now, I'll also say that those returns, like getting someone housed and even getting kudos for that, is going away because we're housing people less, right? So there's this kind of like management leadership push down, like get us results. With the direct service sector, is like we're poor, we're overworked, and many of us are eligible for the same programs that we're working in.
And now because of our president, there's going to be even less resources for what's needed most.
Right. And so this is the other thing we have to come to terms with. This is why I also speak to like mandate and really understanding what you're trying to accomplish as an organization. The money is not going to be there.
Yeah.
Philanthropy is not going to fill the void entirely.
Nope.
State and local governments don't have the resources to fill it entirely. So there's going to be a reckoning with prioritization about where we're going to put our resources at a way that we've never seen it before. And in that, people are going to look at it from the perspective of winners and losers, and it'll feel a bit of Hunger Games-ish, I think, to begin with. Which organization can survive the longest and outlast other organizations go through? I think philanthropy becomes much more competitive in terms of how we position ourselves in other organizations. But I also think that instead of saying our best asset is our staff and we got to keep them happy and, well compensated, that a lot of organizations are saying, yeah, staff are just a means to an end. Right? If you can't do it, Mark, if you can't get all these people housed, I'll get someone who can house them. If you can't reach all these people in street outreach, I'll get someone who can reach someone in street outreach, right? So it's almost like I don't want to lose ground as the executive of the organization, so who can I throw underneath the bus?
Well, some of it is, if you run a shelter, a clinic, or a community program, you know how hard it is to get real, honest feedback from the people you serve. Paper surveys get tossed, suggestion boxes are ignored, and the voices that matter most often go unheard. Pulse for Good changes that. Their feedback system includes secure kiosks, wall-mounted units, mobile tablets for outreach workers, toll-free phone numbers, QR codes, and online surveys, so you can reach people right where they're at. Whether it's in a shelter, a clinic, or an encampment, or online, Pulse for Good makes it easy to listen safely, anonymously, and in real time. And with AI-powered sentiment analysis, you don't just get data, you get insight. To learn more, go to pulseforgood.com/invisible. That's pulseforgood.com/invisible. Bringing up Lhasa here as a very good throw under the bus example. Often it's a smokescreen, and I'll use the example of, and we were talking a little bit about this in the first episode, that, Los Angeles had HHH, which was sold. The United Way sold Los Angeles that if they passed this real estate tax, we would end homelessness. I mean, it was literally, and they knew it wasn't going to, but that was the message that created distrust. So all of a sudden it passed. We're supposed to do 10,000 units. There's all kinds of trouble. 10,000 units ain't going to happen anytime soon. So now we passed H, which is a sales tax increase. And now we have all this money, but we can't house people. And the county felt pressure. What are we going to do? So they hired 1,200 social workers. 1,200 social workers who have no housing.
But this is increasingly happening throughout the country.
Yeah, I was using that as an example.
I think it's a great example because of the scale and its magnitude. But what happens in communities that have lots of unsheltered homelessness? We need more outreach workers. And I could say, actually, you got the right amount of outreach workers. You need more housing. It's like, no, we need more outreach workers. Or a community says, we need another 300-bed shelter. And I'll say, okay, well, let me do some back-of-the-envelope math for you. 300 beds, 365 days a year. What do you need to, staff it? You're thinking you have to go big because of the size and that everybody will, I'm listening to your logic and then come back and say, this is how many people you could have actually housed and ended their homelessness for, right? And in that conversation around the resources, people say, we have to have an abundance mindset. I say, no, we have to have a realistic, the resources are crap, and we have to have tough decisions now before the money even is out the door around what are the most important things to pay for. It's no different in some respects than a household budget. Are there months in my family's life where I wish we had more money to do more things or to get? Absolutely, I do. And there are other monies where we don't do nearly as much as it was a totally comfortable month, right? I mean, there's yins and there's yangs in that space. Yeah. But what I never want to do is spend beyond my means to the point that I'm going to be at risk of losing my housing, right? If we think about at risk of losing your nonprofit, if we make promises beyond the reality of our resources, if we tell elected officials that we can accomplish things that can't be accomplished with the resources that we have, if we insist on celebrating small wins rather than focusing on the tectonic shifts, we're going to be screwed. Yeah. We're absolutely going to be screwed. And I think that in the space of development and fundraising and those sorts of things, it's going to be about who can tell the most sensational story of impact, not who is actually going to be the greatest investment relative to making a difference.
Oh, my gosh. So we just got back from a city that has had significant results in getting people from encampments into housing. Significant. And one of the leaders told me their biggest battle is they need more shelter beds as a pass-through. Mm-hmm. But what's happening is the politicians are still pushing, even though they had significant impact reducing encampments, getting people into housing, politicians are still pushing for more shelters, but not necessarily housing-focused shelters. And they asked, how do you solve this problem where you need housing? You need housing. Otherwise, the shelters are warehousing, right? Because you're not moving people from shelters into housing. And if you have the housing, that means that you don't have to build more shelters. You have the beds available because you have this pass-through.
Yeah. And there is always, we can treat shelters as a process or as a destination. I believe they need to be a process, the process by which people get housed again. But in the mindset of elected officials, I don't think elected officials actually want to end homelessness. Mm. They want to end the visibility of homelessness, right? That is a completely different thing. Right. So shelters are good.
Right.
Because people go inside, especially if they're 24 hours.
And it's the paradigm. Yeah. It's episode 1 where we're talking had a lot to do with messaging, and you hit really a very important point is the public just wants homeless people out of sight.
Out of sight.
And that's what messaging works. So shelters fits in the paradigm because that's what we've been programmed since the Great Depression, maybe even sooner. So that messaging works, which the people pushing for criminalization and forced shelters leverage to the max. And we're still trying to pull on hearts and empathy and say, everybody needs a safe place to sleep. Which actually works towards criminalization because people, they're saying, well, we can't leave them on the sidewalk, so jail is a compassionate solution. That's a safe place.
Yeah, well, if you've never been in a jail and seen what it's like in there. But I also think it feeds into this, I think, first of all, you're right again. And two, this notion of like everybody deserves housing, I can rationalize that and make sense of that in my head. You, given you've been around the block a few times, know what that means. I think about like John or Jane Q. Public, who's like, that guy who's acting like a jerk outside my building at 3:00 in the morning, where the first responders have been here like 5 times in the last 7 days.
Right.
I don't actually think he deserves housing. I think he deserves jail or something different.
Right.
So, like, even these altruistic messages aren't landing in the way that people want them to.
And then we avoid that. So let's try to unpack this. You mentioned it in our tent podcast, which I'll link below. And you mentioned it in the first episode of this, which I'll link below. I'll link all the Iain podcasts below. We'll just cover it. We'll make an Iain podcast playlist. How's that?
Wow.
So, and I agree with you that there's a lot of different demographics of people out on the streets. Mm-hmm. How do we look at that in a way that helps them and helps the community, really helps the community, not this bullshit talking line, a healthy community houses everybody, because people don't want homeless people in their community. What you are saying in the tent podcast, if I remember, there are people that need an extra layer of help that probably should be committed.
Yeah.
Right? Then there's people that just end up homeless for a short period of time.
Yeah.
Rapid rehousing or whatever. But how do we, I don't want to say segment, but how do we differentiate support services? You see where I'm going? How do we help these people in a way that really helps them with the resources we have, but also in a way that the public can get behind? Because that person that is out by the gas station, is very visible, has extreme mental illness, they know that's somebody that's probably not going to do well in housing. We also know that there's people that do have some kind of mental illness, and the trauma of the streets alone creates mental illness, where housing will help that. But housing, you know where I'm going. How do we do this?
Yeah.
What's the roadmap? Have you ever thought of that?
Oh, I spend all sorts of time thinking about things that I'll never figure out how to put into practice.
There's the title of the podcast.
I think it's pretty easy for me to draw a distinction between first-time homelessness and repeated or chronic homelessness. Like, in my mind, that's an easier thing, because when I think first-time homeless, I usually think about the petrified person who doesn't know where to go, who doesn't know where any of the resources are.
You can see it on their face.
Who really does need some sort of like navigator that basically says this is where it is. But I also think that we do a disservice even with that group, in as much as most of our funding and most of our programs are designed as to, are you eligible for what I have to offer, as opposed to what do you need and how do I connect you? right? Those are two different things. So even in street outreach, like we have youth outreach workers and we have veteran outreach workers and we have general public outreach workers, and general public meets a veteran and says you have to wait for the veteran outreach worker, and a veteran outreach worker finds a civilian and says, well, I can't help you. And the youth outreach worker is like, well, I just do youth harm reduction, or I just do youth reunification or whatever.
Multidisciplinary teams.
So we
need more of them.
But we're just tripping over each other and it becomes more confusing to the end user.
That was sarcastic.
But you go to a chronically homeless dude, and I've jokingly, almost somewhat seriously said, it drives me nuts when communities write like resource documents on where all the meal programs are and the shelter programs. Not for the newly homeless folks, makes sense to me for them. But the chronically homeless folks, I'm like, give 5 guys a pizza in an hour, they could write the whole thing for you. Yeah. Right? They could even give you a rating system.
They know where it is. And this is where I hate the apps, because first off, there's an awareness issue. Homeless people go to Google like we all do. They don't know of the app. Number 2 is they know where your services are because they've been turned away countless times.
And they vote with their feet.
Right. And they know, like you said, new to homelessness, could use some resources help. Somebody that's been outside for a little bit, they know what's up. It's not needed.
And this is where, back to the question of like, what do we do? I actually think we need to create a different approach for how we engage people who experience housing loss compared to people who are experiencing chronic homelessness. Mm-hmm. Right? And that distinction has to start at the front door of our system. We shouldn't say no wrong door. In fact, we should say, if you're like new to this experience, these are the 2 or 3 or 5 really correct doors. And these other ones, if you went there, they're just going to tell you to come to these other places. But I think of, again, back to shelters, some being great, some being horrific. There are some shelters where if you were new to homelessness, absolutely show up there. They'll treat you well. They'll help you figure out next things. There are some other environments where like, you really want to tell someone that their life is forever altered, send them to that place during their time of need. So what do we need? We need more structured systems, focus less on eligibility for programs and more on matching people to places that they are eligible, which is going to require a different type of service. 2, we're going to need to accept the reality that criminalization is in the background. That doesn't mean we have to participate in it, but we have to accept that it's here. And I can't see an outreach worker being able to like pretend that doesn't exist in street-based interactions with people in places that they're not wanted. Right. And I don't want to set this up as fear, work with me or else who knows what's going to happen to you. Right. But I also think there's a reality of, and I've seen it firsthand with outreach workers since Grant's past decision, where there's a fearfulness on their part. And I will say we need to sort out the fears so that you can do the direct service of the people you do direct service with and not have to worry. We also have to get out of this kind of competitive nature of, well, I didn't think you were getting the people out of my business area fast enough, so I'm going to hire my own outreach team that tells people that they have to leave, quasi-security.
In the first episode, I wasn't tracking. You hinted at something like that. Now I get it.
It's all over the place.
I get it now.
And I think we can do different in that space. Yeah. And then the last thing that I'll say we need to do completely different is back to the narrative, right? So if we accept this is a reality we're working in, harm reduction is going away, funding is changing, criminalization is happening, housing subsidies may only last 2 years or less, what we're funding in communities will have different priorities. Guess what? The resources aren't there to do a bunch of things. Like, that's the reality. So let's operate within reality while talking about what is possible and impossible, as opposed to what I think is going to happen in some places, which is I'm so afraid of losing the scraps that I have that I'm going to play along and just completely abandon my identity. Or other places where we're going to say, well, screw it, none of us are going to do anything, in which case who suffers is the couple, family, or person that's experiencing homelessness.
We talked about it in the first episode, and bring it up a little bit here. One of the things that drives me crazy about the recycled Soundbites is I look and I read them, see them. Everybody has to see them. Why aren't we clicking that it's not working? And what really makes me mad, people will share a media clip because they were interviewed, even if that media clip doesn't make the case for housing, but because they had their soundbite in it. And what they're doing is they're sending out this media, whether it be a blog post or news post or a video, that maybe the host was biased. Maybe, I hate when media does this, is they use really negative B-roll over, you're talking about solutions and they're showing people doing drugs.
Yep.
Right? And we don't look at that objectively and go, wow, this media piece was really a failure. We say, oh, I was on this and I'm going to share it. And now more people will see more homeless people using drugs.
Dude, the sharing of the media gets back to the ego and the celebrity in the space, right? Why is that person sharing that media clip? Part of it is, look, Ma, I was in the news.
Right.
But you're absolutely right that if we're not critical around the messaging that we're sending, it was like, look, Ma, I was in the news piece around everything that what we do is wrong and that they showed a whole bunch of horrific things about the people that I say that it is my life's work. So there's a lack of authenticity there, right? And don't get me wrong, I've done my share of like traditional media interviews over the years where I've been like, that did not go well.
Right.
I don't blast them all out. No, and it's not that I'm just selective, but part of it is how do I learn what I'm going to say or not say the next time that's going to get out? And there will always be the quote that's taken out of context or whatever. Always, right? Because people fail to appreciate, if you are creating the content, you are telling the story.
Right.
If you're relying upon mainstream media to tell the story.
Which is, I'm trying to talk people into taking control and telling your own story. But they don't. Anyways.
Yeah. Or empower you to tell the story on behalf of a group of people that are like-minded, right?
Build a small army of Alex and Aarons.
Yeah.
Let them loose.
Sure. Let them loose. Make us change the narrative through our content creation, not our content reaction.
One of the things I do when a reporter asks me is, if I'm not an expert, I refer them to somebody. But most say, oh, no, I'm going to talk because then I'll be in. Pete White from LA Can gets reporters all the time for me because I'm not an expert on Los Angeles homelessness. So refer an expert. Refer an expert. Back to where we were.
I think, though, Mark, we knew this would be a pinnacle moment for our sector in the next year. We knew that for many reasons, not just what was happening in the federal government. You and I have both read the tea leaves for a while in terms of anti-homelessness sentiment. What defines us will really be, I think, what's going to happen in response to the current reality. Who lives their values, who still believes that people should be housed. And for everybody who says housing is a right or healthy communities is one where everybody's housed, they got to keep working on that right now. They can't abandon it and they can't be excuse-driven. And which organizations were really, you know what? I did this because it made me feel good, not because it actually made a difference in people's lives. And I say all this is not lost on me that I have a bit of celebrity in the space, as do you, given the work that we do. It's a weird word to use, but I mean, I go to conferences, there's people lined up to get pictures or selfies or, but what I would say from all that is, people like me also have a huge responsibility to use our voice responsibly right now. And if I'm just recycling the same sound bites, I'm not moving the sector ahead. Now is the time to be critical about what we do to be better, not critical for the sake of being critical.
Yeah. And this and a couple other people, we went down to $52,000 worth of operating funds, which means we're powerless. I was even wondering, will I be able to... I have an employee of one, me, and I didn't even know 3 months from now if I'm going to make payroll.
Yeah.
Right? The main reason that we don't get the funding is because we're having conversations like we are right now. And one of the reasons people are sharing the cliche phrases and the links is because they want to do something. They feel the pressure to do something, and that's all they know how to do or have the resources to do. So we're going to do the same old shit over and over again, expecting a different result.
First, we push back against the message, right? So we can kind of come out with all this and say that the messaging in the current reality is not keeping up with the times.
Yeah.
And then what's going to happen is we're going to critique the process, right? So the process is going to be that, well, we should have had a stronger, more coherent voice, but we couldn't agree on how to get there, therefore we did nothing. Where my fear exists in this space over the next few years in terms of also, what are you really for? Is it the things that we are against have to be also agreed to by way of the things that we are against. If we're against 10 things all at once with different factions against those things and we don't have a consolidated voice, then we're not going to make effective change, right? We're going to just be screaming at each other. And the reality is, like, I'm running thin on patience of watching people who should be aligned in this work eat each other up. I'm growing tired of the infighting and the politics. And I'm growing tired of the fact that people aren't accepting that this is the reality, right? Like, you can put out all those sound bites you want and all those links that you want that you're against the executive order. And I'll just keep coming back to the executive order is just the exclamation point on something, the pulse of what's been there for a while. And anybody who didn't see that hasn't been out on the streets and hasn't been feeling the pulse of communities.
2023, Trump said from the stage in the camera that he was going to do this. So we knew.
Project 2025 talked about how Housing First would go away, right? Influential social media personalities on the right have been really clear that they want to move towards criminalization of homelessness. It's not that these things haven't been said. It's that people are reacting that they're finally being said out loud at a scale that we haven't seen before, and where they see that it has greater impact on people's lives because it manifests into an executive order.
One of the things it frustrates me, we scream at the top of our lungs, has to be evidence-based. And there is evidence, strong evidence. If you look at Prager University, if you look at Manhattan Institute, if you look at Discovery Institute, how they're, doing media publishing, if you look at Cicero, there's evidence. I mean, Michael Schellenberger pays people to spread propaganda online. There is evidence that shows not only are they dominating the narrative, all of this is a result of that. And we have basically had our heads in the sand. You brought up a Marxism, stuck on stupid, and that's where we are.
Do you ever fear that we're going to stay stuck on stupid?
I fear it a lot. I mean, one of the things that I was going to ask you, and I'll be honest, I was scared, is that what do you think's going to happen now? And I was going to preface it. It's like, where's HUD? Right? Because even when we had Ben Carson, there was still some connection, right? There was HUD. Now, what? HUD? Who? Where? Huh?
There will still be a HUD because it's the instrument by which they get resources out. But I don't think we should look to HUD as a center for innovation within the work, right? That's going to come from somewhere else. I also think just part of the broader neoliberal ideology is that, like, farming things out to entities that can do your bidding is always part of the corporatization of government, right? And that doesn't necessarily exist in the nonprofit world, or only certain types of nonprofits, right? Not the service delivery ones. HUD is in my opinion, going to become more about a function of dotting I's and crossing T's and less about kind of driving any specific agenda, because I think the secretary's email was quite clear. Like, they're looking to faith-based organizations to drive the agenda. They're looking to other entities to kind of enter into the space and do the work differently.
Yeah. George W. tried that.
Well, the compassionate conservative Christian approach, for me, like, for all the critiques I had, especially in hindsight, I could live with that because I understood it, because it really was things that words that made sense together. Yeah. Now the word compassion is code for coercion. It's not about compassion. Yeah. And now it's not about conservatism, means something completely different than what it did underneath George W. So I think there's a lot to be said there.
We can unpack that. We're going to give you a little break here. So we're still going to talk about what's happening, what's coming. But we've hinted on the faith-based. And so that people totally understand it. I come out of that world. I lived in a church shelter for 7 effing years. I was chief marketing officer for one of the largest rescue missions in the country. But we were very unique, one of 3 or 4, maybe even less, because we had 200 housing units and a shelter with 150 beds. So we believed in housing, and we had a chaplain. We offered religion and prayer if people wanted it, but it was never forced, never mandatory. The typical gospel rescue mission does, like, I've seen them at 14 days, sometimes it's 30 days, mostly it's 30 days, where they bring the transients in kind of like an emergency shelter. But if you want like something more, like a softer bed with a nicer pillow, and you get better food or whatever, then you got to go into their year-long Bible study. What happens, and I have seen countless times, is they put 6 graduates across the stage, and they claim this is a victory because these people are now sober, but they had structure. So as soon as that structure is gone, many of them go back to drinking. And what's not measured, you got the 6 people on the stage, they don't show you the 60 people that either are like, I can't do 2 Bible studies a day, this is insane, or maybe they were on medications that this rescue mission didn't allow, and so they were rolled up because, Jesus heals, but not you, brother.
In the space of the intersection of religion and homelessness response, one thing we have to appreciate is that even historically, many of the what would be, seen as secular nonprofits now grew out of a Christian church basement.
Yeah.
Right? Yes, there are some places for other faiths to be involved, but mainly Christian, mainly kind of basements, sometimes as an extension of the ministry of that church, and then it kind of splintered off into its own nonprofit. What's different has always been different with some of the missions, many of the missions, and then some other mission-esque type programs that may not call themselves a mission, but they're certainly doing it under evangelization, is they're not trying to separate the two, right? They're just trying to say they're one and the same. And when they do it best, they do it as it is entirely optional, right? Like we have a chaplain, we have Bible study. If you want it, you can have it. There's no coercion. I've seen that done well. Yeah. Where it's done poorly is you want a nice bed? You want some real food? You want better chores?
Hungry? Say the sinner's prayer.
Right.
Hungry? Say the sinner's prayer.
That's where we start saying there's a good and bad approach to how people are living their religion. But to the point of the changed reality, we can jump up and down and hold our breath and kick and scream and say, but we've worked so hard to professionalize the response to homelessness. What do churches really know? And I'll say, look at history. There's something to be learned there. Some of those same churches that enter into the space even nowadays, they realize 2 months into doing their coffee program or their meal program, this work is really hard, and they need some professionals around to actually help manage the masses.
Yeah. Why I brought that up, what's dangerous about what HUD is doing now, leaning towards faith-based organizations, and I get the lobbying, I get what's happening at the White House and at Congress and why it's happening, but faith-based organizations, most of them, especially gospel rescue missions, most of them, there's some good ones, but most of them are not trying to prevent and solve homelessness. They're trying to win people to Jesus.
Yeah.
Those are 2 different agendas.
And if they want to win people to Jesus, win people to Jesus.
Right.
If they want to solve homelessness, solve homelessness. Yeah. But don't try to solve homelessness in the name of Jesus.
Yep.
And don't try to Jesus in the name of homelessness.
And I am scared. I'm concerned. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. All the above. I can keep going. I don't even know if Invisible People's going to be around much longer, right? I know we have significant impact. I know our voice is needed now more than ever. I shared the other day the best way for the homeless sector to support Cicero Institute is to underfund Invisible People, which they're doing. Anyways, if I look at what's happening now, it's kind of like a divorce. It gets worse before it gets better. So there's part of me that's still, even though the glass is empty, it's still half full, right? And that's where we are right now, because the glass has been dry for a while and it's getting drier. But I believe, and I wish it wasn't so, it's going to get worse.
It's going to
get way worse. Through that, my hope is that it will get better at some point. I'm almost getting emotional thinking about this because I'm 64 years old. I look at what's going on and I'm like, fuck, it's not going to get better before I die.
No.
And I don't mean that as a personal thing. I mean that as I really believed that we could prevent and solve homelessness because we can. I believe the world is against us, but we, as we've said a couple of times, we have to start looking at ourselves.
I had this terrible revelation last fall. I was working on a speech for a national conference, and it's the first time I was willing to admit to myself and then also decided I'd say publicly, we're not going to end homelessness in my lifetime. And for the first couple of decades, like, that was it, man. That was my reason for existing, is that I would die a happy man because this really complex social issue had been wrestled to the ground, and either it didn't exist or much less of it existed, but we were moving in the right direction. And now I think, I'm in my mid-50s, and my trajectory is such that certainly in my professional life, it probably won't be done. In my personal life, by the day I die, that it won't be done. And I don't mean like there's never people dislodged from housing, but really chronic homelessness is what I mean. That it's a manufactured reality that we can do better in. And I'm not convinced anymore. I'm actually convinced that the prison industrial complex wants people to lock up, and the next cohort of people that are a good population to do that, given that there's been changes in substance use and like marijuana has become legal in so many states, is that we need someone to fill our.
Yep.
So that's one group. I fear that the evangelical nature, that it'll continue to become a moralized issue as opposed to being seen as a social science issue. I actually think that there's many organizations now who are much more interested in social control than they are in social service. And I actually think that we as a society really haven't reckoned with and what should be done about people experiencing homelessness. Because when we tried our approach to housing people without the housing and without doing it right, celebrating the small wins but then being disjointed, that didn't work. But when people see the visible decrease in homelessness, even though people are going to be in prisons or jails or work camps or whatever, when they see it, they're going to say, guess what? This new approach worked, and all those other folks didn't know what they were doing.
And we're not saying, and I'm going to speak for you because I know you good enough, don't fight less. We're saying, see the world as it really is. If we were far more authentic and realistic and said, you know what, we're going to give it the best effort. We need your help in doing this. It's going to be hard. We can solve homelessness. Let's do it. Instead of going, we're ending homelessness, we're ending homelessness, we're ending homelessness. And that has hurt us.
It has, because we can't even agree on what the definition of ending homelessness means.
Oof.
And so how do you combat an approach that is basically saying homelessness is never going to be ended with a sector that says, yeah, I can, but your version, that person's version, that person's version, that person's version are like all different approaches.
Yep.
It's mind-boggling.
So one of the things, and you might have some takes, my lens is communication, is AI is around the corner. A couple of things that there was some research that video has now surpassed text-based news. We knew this was coming. Your Joe Rogans, your Substacks, all that surpassed your traditional legacy media. And the homeless sector is still stuck on legacy media, but maybe there's change. Anyways, the one that really gets to me, or the one that I'm most concerned about, is how we're going to be getting our information from Google Gemini or OpenAI chatbot or Claude. Claude is another one. And all these chatbots. Because what's happening now, you used to be able to say, how many homeless people in Los Angeles in Google, and you would get some links. And you click through, maybe that's where you sign up to be a volunteer or you get taken on a path. That no longer happens.
Right.
It's answers.
Yep.
ChatGPT gives you answers. Gemini gives you answers. So you never go and click. But also those answers, where are they coming from?
Yeah.
Fox News, CNN, Breitbart, The rescue mission, the National Alliance, how, and at some point, they're going to be paid, right? Just like Google top search results, you had to pay for them. You're going to see that. And we are not even close to ready because we're still doing recycled sound bites for legacy media. So we're not even ready. My solution would be if I had money, and I pitched it to one of these large nonprofits in the homeless sector, good organization. I don't know if they go to. I said, you need to develop your own chatbot. You need to create your own information so people could go and say, it's a credible resource. Because where we're going, trust is going to be the resource, because credibility is going to be everything. So if people are looking for information about homelessness, you have to provide that chatbot for them to be able to get information that's credible. Last but far from least, and I did this when I was speaking, and it was years ago. And it's funny because we're both friends with Tim Richter. Mm-hmm. So I asked, it was Grok, because Grok has less guardrails. And I wanted Tim Richter in a tent as a homeless person in a tent community. Tim is has a good sense of humor, whatever. That's how I started. And I ended up I asked Grok to create an image of a homeless man eating a baby.
And it did.
So the baby's on the fire, right? And, the homeless man is getting there. You can tell that it is, and this is probably 2 years ago, you can tell it's computer generated, right? It is getting so good. AI video, generative AI, photos, even writing scripts and research, and the right's using it, guaranteed. They're using it to, better message to us that there's, there was one just recently, it wasn't an AI thing, but Tommy Lee Jones, who's 86 years old. Did you see the Instagram that he's dating Jessica Ortega or
No.
the Wendy? It's a complete lie. But it's produced in such a good way, you believed it, that I had to go Google it. You know what I mean? What I'm trying to get the homeless sector to see, and again, back to the reason that they share the recycled sound bites is they don't know anything better to do, or they don't have the resources, is the misinformation and propaganda that's going to come from the right is going to be unthinkable to me. And it's going to be hard for people to differentiate what's true and what's not. And they're going to use it to get people to hate homeless people even more.
Mm-hmm. It's true. I mean, it's interesting you were talking about the advancements in technology. And this summer, I had the choice between social work intern and social planning intern. And so I went with a software engineering intern. And people would say, like, what does a group like yours need with a software engineer? I need someone who can speak bots. I need someone who can get behind the scenes, who can, answer our own internal questions, figure out how to infiltrate other places. That's what I need. Yeah. And I don't mean infiltrate in, a negative, like a hacking. Go find me the information that actually is everything I need to know about the counter argument to this. It's fascinating as we evolve as a society, though, and this is probably an interesting place for us to kind of bring this to an end. When we look at the current reality, how do we continue to focus on solutions rather than sound bites?
Ooh, I'm stealing that.
How do we focus on, I'll say, innovation, although that word gets overused, but if we just do what we've always done, we're not going to get any support. Doubling down on what we've already done, we're going to have to demonstrate something different, which is what this is. And lastly, I'll say, we're going to have to talk to actual people who are homeless and ask them what they want in this current reality. If we don't, we're going to be speaking for people, we'll be using technology for people, we'll be trying to solve problems that may not be the right problem. Yeah. And the only thing that gives me hope in all this, again, is it might actually galvanize us to sort some stuff out that we just haven't sorted out for a long time as a sector.
Like I said, it's like a divorce. Somebody once told me when I was going through my divorce, it's going to get worse, but it will get better. So I keep on latching on that. As far as I think the homeless sector is void of innovation. I can't speak to the nonprofit sector, but as a whole, but I do know nonprofit communications, nonprofit technology is usually behind. This is one of the reasons I recommend people go to, the people that sell sugar water and cars, because they understand consumer behavior, they understand data even better. But what, majority of nonprofits raise under $500,000 a year. We have learned, small businesses are where innovation happens. It's now called startups. And there's all, now it's become venture capitalists, but it used to be small business administration. There was ways that small businesses were incentivized to grow because that's where the innovation is. There's nothing for small nonprofits. Absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. And I believe that is one of the reasons we're so void of innovation, besides being risk averse.
Well, these have been two somber conversations.
Yep.
Probably not low energy, but much more, structured in our thoughtfulness. The challenge here, of course, is we don't know exactly what the future is going to hold. We don't know if this is going to be as bad as it seems to some or better than it seems to others. We don't know if wait and see is the best approach or be proactive is going to be the best approach. But I think waiting and being reactive is the worst thing that we can do.
And good God, people, just pay attention to what's going on.
If you don't dip your toe into the universe of media that you don't feel aligned to from time to time. So, for example, even if you're a CNN watcher, watch Fox News from time to time, just to hear how and what is said, and not so you're so upset because it runs contrary to who you are as a person. Listen to how they're messaging it, because it's resonating with a ton of people.
Huge. I posted this on LinkedIn. YouTube analytics gives you what videos are showing your video that people are clicking in from, right? They're watching something and, oh, okay, I'm going to go to Louisville over here, right? I'm always checking that to see, what they're watching coming into. And I was looking at Louisville last night. There were a bunch of videos from normal people speaking against criminalization. Many of them had 80,000 views, 60,000 views, far above what any nonprofit other than Invisible People is having in the space talking about criminalization. And there was one, now she was van life specific, but her messaging was so good that that's the one I used. And it wasn't super produced. I think it had 250,000 views, which is significant for this conversation. Mm-hmm. But she explained how living in your vehicle is being illegal. And I thought to myself, why aren't we as a sector looking for these people and then helping them, because they have an audience, helping them reach more people? And it hit me because we're driven by corporate communicators, which has a place if you're reaching government, different areas. But, as you did, you hired a content creator.
Hire a content creator to work with me to get my ideas to the masses.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for spending time.
Thanks for having me back, Mark.